Hello, welcome to DIY Access. I am your host, Kat Chuddy, and today we are going to be talking to the co-curators of Opulent Mobility, Laura Brody and Anthony Tussler. Opulent Mobility is a show centering disabled voices, reimagining disability, and it was the brainchild of Laura Brody. She very quickly ended up collaborating with Anthony Tussler, who applied to the show. You'll hear more about this story from the both of them. And the two of them now collaborate on this project as well as many others. Anthony Tussler is a wheelchair-using photographer, writer, and community builder and activist. Laura Brody is an artist, curator, and designer and costume maker. And just as a quick note, this show is coming back around again this year, and they are currently taking applications of work. I think it's up to 10 works, and it's open up through July 31st. So if you are interested in what you're about to hear and you want to become part of this, go ahead and check out their website, opulentmobility.com, and reach out and get in touch with either one of them or submit your work to the show. I was part of the show last year, and it was a wonderful experience, and I highly recommend trying to participate in this. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and hear from them. It's about 2 months late from the recording, but better late than never, as we'll talk about a little bit crypt time during our conversation. Go ahead and start with both of you introducing yourself. Let's start with Laura.
Hi, I am Laura Brody, and I'm the founder and curator, the co-curator of Opulent Mobility. And here I am. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're welcome. Anthony?
I'm Anthony Tussler. I'm in Northern California, and I'm the co-curator of Opulent Mobility. I'm a wheelchair user, longtime photographer, and been interested in disability and the arts for a long time.
Okay, so where did this show idea start out of? Did you both start this idea? Was it primarily, can you bring me through the history of this very briefly, like kind of walk us through this?
Okay, well, in short, this is something I came up with. I had for years been, because a former boyfriend had a stroke, and I got a lot more intimately acquainted with adaptive devices, so wheelchairs, walkers, and a whole bunch of other ones. And while I was really excited about how many devices could be around to help people, I was also kind of horrified with my artist's eye, looking at it like, this does not have to look like that. There's no reason. And flash forward many years and changes of relationship later, and a friend of mine had an old wheelchair that he wasn't using, and offered it to me to do up for an art event. So I dressed it up as an Edwardian throne, and it was very, very pretty, and it nearly knocked him on his feet, or on his face, really, because I didn't understand about the padding that would. He was quadriplegic, and that really threw off his balance. I made the padding too thick. But in looking at it, I thought, okay, there's a lot I don't know. First off, I need to do a lot of research, and I'm not a medical device person, okay? But let's find out, is anybody else doing stuff like this? And I found patents for some really interesting designs, but I was not finding anything on the market. And at the same time, I was having a real tough time finding places to show this work, because it seemed like such a jerk move to show wheelchairs in places that are not wheelchair accessible. So I went, okay, I can't be the only one who's interested in this. And I started to put together and asked other people, because I'm a theater and TV film costumer, and I'm a collaborator, and I really like working with other people. So asked other people to join me and put together a show that was real small. And kind of through that, just started asking people about reimagining disability, and I didn't define it. I didn't define what disability meant. And I got the coolest stuff, because people were actually talking about not just device using, of course, but mental health issues and visible disabilities, and a whole world opened up for me. And ever since then, I've been starting to work with that. Anthony contacted me for about the first one, the very first show.
Oh, it was. Okay.
Yeah, because you'd sent in one of your photos, but it was like well past the deadline, and
Right.
but I put that up, and then we talked together about trying to work together. And I don't remember what specifically you said you
Me
were intrigued.
neither.
You were intrigued by the idea. I was intrigued by the idea. I wanted to work with somebody who'd had such a long-standing background in disability arts and culture because I didn't. And then we've also found out that we work together really well, which has been awesome. We mostly do this remotely. You know, I'll send my Dropbox files full of the images, and we'll set up phone calls and like, this is great. Oh my God, what were they thinking? Yeah, back and forth. This actually worked out really, really well. But I don't know that I was really conscious when I was working with you to say, I want to work with somebody who has a wealth of knowledge that I don't have. It was pretty clear from the start that it's like, this is going to be a new world for me. So I'm going to want to have a guide. I'm going to want to have some people who know what they're talking about.
So, and that's the role that I've pretty much played, is that you've got surprisingly astute judge of what works and what doesn't within this arena. Because it's so easy, not being a part of the disability community, to misjudge, to bring in biases. And I mean, the only place where I've had to shore things up a little bit is I think of that image that we had of the wheelchair that turned into a butterfly, and it wasn't a bad piece at all.
No.
It was way too saccharine for me, but it was okay for the show.
Yeah.
And you didn't realize just how much
Everybody and their dog picked up on that one.
Oh yeah.
Oh, it was so
I
annoying.
tried to warn you, and it just you didn't believe me that it was going to turn into
Like,
such.
it's just a drawing. It's not that exciting. With this,
Oh, everybody wants to see the wheelchair turn into a butterfly, for God's sakes. So anyway, mostly what my role has been, I mean, and we do work together well, is to talk over these things and to kind of just get settled in what's included and what's not. And mostly what I do is just say to Laura, you're right. That's good. That's great. No, that's crap. Don't put it. You're right. It's crap. Don't do it. I mean, because occasionally you'll say, I'm not sure. I mean, is this really as bad as I think it is? And I invariably go, yes, absolutely. It's worse than you think it is, I mean, because we get some nasty stuff. I mean, it just,
oh man.
and it's,
we get amazing.
I'm in a cranky mood. I better stop. What's that?
Yeah, it's like, don't get me wrong. We get really a lot of amazing work, but some of them are just doozies. It's like,
Yeah,
am I missing something here?
Well, and I like the stuff that we get that's just like, wait a second, what's this? And you realize, and Kat, I mean, I think your stuff was a little bit like that for me. It was kind of like, wait, what is this? I know it's something good, but I don't know if it fits or not. And digging just a little bit, it was like, oh, okay, this is some good stuff. And so I like that. I mean, it's both the personal experience of that as well as bringing it to the world to say, take a look at this. I've been, my dad owned a camera store. I mean, I took pictures. My first award was when I was 11 years old for photography. And so I'm very visual, I think that's part of the disability experience too, kind of. And I've had a disability since I was 5. And helped do an art show in the early 80s. And since then, I've been keeping an eye out for how do we portray disability through the arts? How do we change the world? Because that's what I'm about, is changing the world around disability.
Oh yeah.
You know, I want power. I want my rights. I want inclusion. I want to be celebrated. And I want to be there with my brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And I think that's it's something that I've noticed that it's like a fight, especially in academia, because I'm in my second institution right now trying to get my master's degree, and it exists everywhere. And I call it trauma porn. It's this
Right.
idea that the only way to create like a sense of empathy or understanding for this othered person, no matter what that othered person is, whether we're talking about race or disability or gender or sexuality, it doesn't matter. It's the same process of othering. And there's this knee-jerk reaction that the work that is most effective is the most shocking, the grossest, the show all the scars, pull all the guts out. And I think that I've tried that and I did that and it didn't work. And that was my biggest pull away. And so that was part of like the frustration I was feeling, and why I created this podcast is like, I started shifting my own work towards, like, Anthony, you were talking about like these people that are like proud to be disabled and they're really like confrontational about that stare. I mean, I feel like there's a lot more creators now that are doing those things.
Yeah.
If you're not aware of Hell on Wheels, they put spikes all over assistive devices, is very 80s punk rock. And so we're starting to finally have that variety, Laura, that you said that was missing, that was like, we have personalities too. And we, you know, we would like that to be able to be shown through these devices that we use, and that the art that we make doesn't necessarily have to be this like detailed unfolding of medical history. It can relate back to other life experiences. So that was one of the conversations I wanted to talk about a little bit. Like, how do you make those discernments as an artist who is disabled and is creating work? And how do you create empathy without either leaning towards these two extremes of trauma porn or
inspiration
porn?
Right.
It's the
or even in the middle.
I mean, you need like the go on about the middle, the spot in the middle.
As a photographer, one of the things that I look for is how are people representing their community. And so you see this with homeless people, with migrant farm workers. I mean, all kinds of different, marginalized groups. And it's always this kind of opaque, put on your public face. And that public face I don't find particularly interesting. What I find interesting is the much softer stuff. I saw something that came out of the African-American community, and there are people smiling. Young guys, young Black men who are smiling. And it's just, those are the photos you don't see. And so that I try and do that with my disability stuff, where it's people just hanging out and being, and the mundane. So it's, how do we lift the veil on all three aspects of it?
I like using humor also to kind of
right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys saw my videos that were very much reactions to things that I'm sure you both heard during your days. Like someone tells you, oh, you're so inspirational, and they mean it in the best possible way, but inside your soul is just like cringing and dying. Yeah. So I just took it to the extreme, and I was like, look at me brushing my teeth. I'm a hero.
My socks match this morning. Look at how inspirational I am.
It's amazing. Well,
give yourself a gold star for
that's right. Two socks, 2 stars.
So I think
Yeah.
humor is an important tool personally for me. I don't know how
Oh,
you
yeah.
both feel about
No,
that.
absolutely.
Honestly, that's a large part of how we choose our pieces.
Yeah.
People who have humor and layers and depth to the work, because it's just so much more interesting than all of it. I when something's a little too surface, it's like, okay, that's great. We want something a little bit more in depth.
Well, that's the definition of kitsch, is that it's only surface.
It's just not. It's not interesting, and it doesn't really have as much to say.
Right.
I feel.
And so it doesn't have to be laugh out loud humor. It can be a lightness as well. I mean, thinking about the stuff that's been in opulent mobility over the years, you know, there's a lightness to a lot of it. You know, not always, which is good. I mean, you have to have variety, but
yeah, there's some lateness, there's some whimsy, there's
yeah, definitely whimsy.
yeah, but also just a sense of like more about humanity. It's not about, I don't know, driving in the dirt most of the time.
Right.
And there is plenty of that, and there's plenty of work for that, and I think that it certainly has its place. But that, I feel like, at least for me, the biggest thing for starting this was, how do we have conversations that are not just between academics and academics, or disabled people, or abled people and able? How do we have conversations together? And that one of the ways to do that is with humor and with lightness and with opening up other ways of people thinking about things. Like, one of the ones that I remember that was just really delightful was, a friend of mine has chronic migraines, and that submitted a piece that was an animatronic activated origami, a representation of a migraine aura. And the amount of people responding to that was so great, because they could feel it, and they also, it had not ever occurred to them that that was disabling. Like,
Right.
I mean, I've actually only recently had to come to terms that some of the things that I deal with medically would actually qualify me as being. I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that yet. It's like, okay, dealing with that day by day. But, like, chemical sensitivities over time will do that.
Yeah. We've had a conversation, probably need another one. Yeah.
Yeah, I had my own, I think it took me, I was like in and out of a bed for 7 years before I could wrap my head and my mouth around the word disabled and really
Right.
like own that, because everyone around me was so busy like convincing me that I was one day going to be okay. It just was going to take
You're
one
fine.
more procedure, one more medication, one more treatment, and realizing that it's actually healthy to get to a point where you're like, this is how things are, and that's okay. And
Right.
I accept that, and then having everybody be so like, shocked by that. It's a completely different way of living your life.
Yeah.
Well, and it is the language. It's unfortunate that it's, disable. I mean, as my wife says, it's too bad it wasn't watermelon. It'd be a lot easier, but it's not. And so it's the term we've agreed upon. And so there it is. And then sometimes it makes it harder to embrace, but once you do, then it's transcendent. And for me, I mean, I spent a long time looking through the dictionary trying to find another word, and finally gave up and said, okay, I will use that term rather than cripple to describe myself.
I mean, even that word, there's been some younger communities that are trying to take it back.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've tried it out a few times, and it always feels like a inherently negative word, but
My generation uses it. The first wave of disability rights, contemporary disability rights.
Yep.
We call each other Crips.
yeah, crip time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Ed Roberts used to when you show up for a meeting 3 hours late, say, I'm running on Crip time.
That's great.
Well, it left a lot of wreckage,
Um,
unfortunately.
I had an interesting question. I especially wanted to ask you, Anthony, and maybe also you, Laura. Like, I know that we all try to veer away from this idea of being inspiration porn, but what, if any, is there a difference between that and like, can the disabled community have its own heroes and have its own um people that the younger generations can look up to? Because I feel like that's like almost a push and pull argument going on there, like, or a very tight line to walk. I don't know how you all feel about that.
But I mean, when I do any kind of trainings, I've done a fair amount of bias training and around disability, as I drag out the history, because that's, it, we do have heroes, and it's I love that Crip Camp, which have you seen it, Kat?
Yeah, that's a great movie.
Okay, good. Um, Crip Camp helped redefine in many ways who the heroes are, because the dominant narrative was out of the West Coast, and that was Ed Roberts, started the disability rights movement. And so to bring in some women like Judy Heumann and Kitty Cohn and others, and just to show that it was a movement like any others. Ed is in a sense, our Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was not the beginning of that movement. She was the culmination of the Montgomery bus boycott. They spent years getting ready to do the boycott and finding the right person to say, no, I won't move. And the same thing's true. Ed Roberts, he became our symbol. But, I think we're like most movements. We've got our heroes. We've got, young people who come in and say, I don't believe it. I mean, all the push pull of any marginalized community that suffered trauma. It's not easy. I mean, sometimes in the disability community, I get pretty discouraged because we are playing out some of the trauma and the internalized depression that we have. But I believe that, that's interesting here in the Bay Area. I was on a webcast from the county equity office, and it was about disability justice. And one of the people doing the presentation read, well, that disability justice is looking at intersectionality, and the disability rights movement was racist and sexist and homophobic. And I was like, that's a little extreme. Of the time, we tended to be racist and sexist and homophobic, because that in the 70s, that's the nature of the world at the time. And some of us were quite racist and others not nearly so much. And then at the same time, out of a similar organization, they're looking at celebrating people of my generation who led the way. And so both are going on. And I think that's really healthy, to have that push pull and to make, in particular to, I think it's valuable to, to hear that presentation, to look at, how am I doing with my racist bias, because I grew up this culture, I've got it, and my homophobia and my ableism, and so to be confronted, I don't like it. I think there's better ways to do it. I think there's little softer ways that get you there faster, but it's good to interrogate that stuff.
Always. Yeah. I'm still doing it. I still, like, I think I'll catch myself saying things I shouldn't be saying,
Yeah,
it's always changing, and society is constantly evolving towards becoming better. So, I mean,
right.
we all should be engaged in this constant like bettering of ourselves. But
I
Yeah,
think that's so important. I mean, one of the things that frustrates me, I think, is that when people assume when you're talking about heroes that they can't be human.
right, right,
Like, and that's just not real. Yeah, I think it's better to assume that every last one of us is totally capable of screwing up.
right.
I know I am. Try to listen. I try to be more open to it. And honestly, being willing to say that, and instead of just, I don't know, the vitriol that sometimes comes out, and saying, you know, yes, it's totally right to call people out on it. Also, sometimes say, look, I can call you out and maybe allow somebody a chance.
yes,
Screwed up.
Right.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I mean, I sat on this podcast idea for over a year, and part of it is what you're talking about. I was so afraid of, like, I'm aware that I have some internalized ableism. I'm aware that I have my own biases, and I know that they're going to slip out, and I am constantly working on that. And so, I mean, we're talking about the internet here. So we've got, I mean, trolls just waiting in the wings for you to say the wrong thing and just jump all over it. What I finally came to was like that I just needed to do it, and that I was going to mess up, just like you said.
Right.
And the first episode, I immediately got feedback that was like, well, when I listened to it on Spotify, I can't tell who's who. So I took notes, and,
Yeah.
that
Oh, yeah. You
course
got, yeah.
corrected. And I think we all need to give each other a little more space to, like, the people are going to make mistakes, and people are a little set in their ways, and like these are conversations that need to be had, and people, I would hope, would be more willing to have them. But um more often than not, I'm met with that brick wall of defensiveness.
Yeah. And
Well, it is internalized depression. It is that it's one of the things. I read a small book on internalized depression. And one of the things that would happen to me is that I'd be sitting on a panel of disabled folks, and somebody would say something that I thought was wrong. And I'd get pissed off. And what I wanted to do is call them out in public on it. And I read, which I also know, absolutely to be true, is my job in public is to support my brothers and sisters, no matter how wrong-headed they are. I'm sure there's a line you can cross where I shouldn't support them, but I haven't seen that line yet. But then in private, tell them my thoughts on why that was not the best way to. And I'm really good at not confronting them in public. I'm not so good about going up to them afterwards and saying, that you might not want to use that language when you talk about it, or why do you think that way? So
I'm
it's evolving.
I'm laughing because I'm the opposite. I'm really bad at doing the call out in public, because I think there's also layers there that you might not be aware of. And, I sit in a position where I've like been a teacher a few times, and I'm teaching again next semester. So I try to think of like where they're sitting, and
Right.
not, yeah, and not trying to put any extra pressure on anybody. So
it's just tricky. It's
yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
it. I know one of the things that has been happening with Opulent Mobility is that each time we put it out, it's like, how can we make this more accessible? In what way? To a different audience? What areas have I missed out on? What do I not know? What is coming up? And I think the willingness to try regularly and make different efforts has to be what counts, and that we're real snap judgment right now because people will judge you by this little tiny snippet of time or a tweet or a picture on Instagram, whereas in truth all of us are evolving.
Right.
All
Well,
shifting
it is.
where we just do, and sometimes it takes a while before
Well,
that.
in the arts, how to make it accessible how do you make visual arts more accessible? It's
It's
there's a
super
lot of wrestling going on around this.
We
Yeah.
had a talk recently by Amanda Kachia. I don't
Oh,
know.
cool.
Yeah,
Good.
it was
Yeah.
amazing. So I didn't make the talk, but I got the recording. So that was just fantastic. So they even made it accessible to me, even though I couldn't make it to the talk.
Good.
And her talk was great. So she was focusing on the museum space as being accessible to
Right.
visitors. And then I'm planning on talking again with Rob Duart, who made with his class, you might have heard about this project, an entire exhibit for blind people.
Mhm.
So we're going to talk about like, because we just had a casual conversation and he said it's completely changed his entire approach as an artist, just doing this one project. So
Cool.
this show is roping in other people from not just the disability community. We had on the last podcast, John Stowe, who assisted Cody and Andrew Kowalski with making the screen printing accessible for Cody. So I'm also hoping for this to evolve into this like permanent record online for anyone that might need it. So talking with you two about like, how do you do something as daunting as starting a show? Like, do you have any, like I'm giving my side of starting the podcast. Do you have any advice for people out there that are listening or watching that are sitting on a project and haven't started yet?
Start.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't mean to be glib. I'm saying that I did start because I had done theater stuff and like I could put on a show. How hard will it be? Which was a foolish thing for me to say, but it doesn't matter because I did it. Because you're going to suck the first time. You're just going to. And you may as well get that out and done. You may as well because you're gonna. I stumbled so many times, but if you at least make an effort, then you'll figure something out. It also really helps to be stubborn. It took
Yeah.
me a
You
year
got a
to find it.
perseverance. Yep.
Yeah, it took me a year to find the first place. Well, not to find it. I knew where I wanted it. To have them answer it took me a year.
I had forgotten about how much
Oh,
trouble it was back when we were just,
oh.
oh God.
And like, and because honestly, that one turned out because the person who was running the space was resentful of the time that he had to deal with the building inspectors making the place accessible. I'm like, okay, that's a whole nother conversation that we can have. And they're like, you don't even know what kind of biases or personal stuff you're running up against. You know.
Well, and you've run into it in a couple of different venues where it's just,
Ooh.
it's wacky, you know?
It's frustrating, but and yeah, I mean, I think every time we put one on, there's something that's like, why am I doing this?
Right.
Well, I
not
know the last one,
doing this.
you had it Wing Walker, right? At the brewery. And you both had talked during the artist talk about how that was so vastly different. Did you feel like that was more accessible both as a space for disabled people and to the general public?
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to ask, like, are you considering, I'm hoping you're doing this again because it was such an amazing experience. And are you considering like alternative spaces like that? Because that's something that we're also doing with the print club at the school, is thinking about places like pop-ups at banks and like finding places to put the work in front of people.
I strongly encourage it.
Yeah.
Especially well, in Los Angeles, there are a lot of issues with places that really aren't accessible. And there are huge issues about grandfathered in and things not being repaired, and more about building codes and repair issues and grumpy landlords than anything else. But a lot of places are already required to be. So
Okay.
go to those places, find those places.
Well, galleries are in, oftentimes in older buildings and, cheap rents and,
But if you can find a space that has an open area,
right.
do it. And find ways. I mean, I have in fact built ramps to go up into things. Those are not necessarily the best choices for all your venues, but some there are plenty of places that actually have accessible bathrooms and accessible
Right.
spaces and parking. And if you can have that, that's awesome. It's probably easier than finding a gallery that has it.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kat, you definitely want to talk to Fran Osborne because she
Mm.
teaches at San Francisco State on making exhibits accessible. So
Yeah, if you all would put me in touch with her, that would be fantastic.
sure, happy to.
Absolutely. Yeah. She does a great job.
And yeah, thank you. I think we like pretty much covered all the bases. Is there anything that either of you would like to add to the community listening out there?
Support the arts. Support artists.
Well, and also recognize now, like, look, it's really easy with the world being the way it is right now to maybe think that this isn't important. But the thing is that art is a large part of how people's minds get changed and hearts
Right.
get changed. And if we aren't still fighting for creative use of imagination and art and new ways of thinking about things, what are we fighting? You
That's
know, that this is important too.
That was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much to Laura and Anthony for being willing to talk to me and to share this information with all of you. Join us for our next episode where I will be interviewing Rob Duart and Meredith Lynn, who co-collaborated on their own series of projects called Extrasensory, which occurred at the Museum of Fine Arts at Florida State University. These shows started with the idea of looking at a visually impaired or blind audience and thinking about what that means in terms of redesigning a show. Rob Duart is the digital media area head and is an associate professor in the Department of Art at Florida State University. He is also the co-director for the Facility for Arts Research. Meredith Lynn is the interim director and curator of the Museum of Fine Arts at FSU and is also an assistant professor of art. I had the great pleasure of having class with Meredith. She is an absolutely wonderful instructor, and Rob Duart is an amazing human being full of information. I hope that you will join us for this conversation, and I look forward to talking with them and sharing our conversation with all of you. Until next time.